The other important thing is the discovery of the name of Sinmud, the architect of Queen Hatsut, and also we found evidence that the name of Totmudi. Scientists have made a shocking discovery in Queen Hutepsut's DNA. The powerful Egyptian ruler once admired for her wisdom and strength may have carried a secret no one expected. What they found changes how we see her life and death, and it's leaving historians and experts deeply unsettled. Some truths were never meant to be uncovered. Join us as we uncover the details of what they found in Queen Hatshepsut's DNA. The mystery of the missing tooth. For many years, one of the greatest mysteries in Egyptology lay inside a quiet room of the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. Among rows of ancient mummies and artifacts, there was one body that puzzled scientists. The remains labeled KV60A belonged to a woman, but no one knew who she was. Her tomb, found in the Valley of the Kings, contained few clues, and the body's identity had remained uncertain for decades. Experts believe she was someone of high rank, possibly even royal, but her name had vanished from history. The mystery began long ago, when British archaeologist Howard Carter discovered the small tomb in the early 20th century. Inside were two female mummies, both poorly preserved. One of them was moved to Cairo while the other was left behind in the tomb. Years passed and interest faded. The tomb was nearly forgotten until Egyptian archaeologists reopened it many years later. They renamed the mummy KV6A, but her true name was still a question no one could answer. By the early 2000s, new technology gave scientists fresh tools to explore ancient mysteries. Dr. Zahi Hawass, Egypt's chief archaeologist, led a team determined to identify KV6A. Their work combined modern science with deep historical knowledge. They hoped to solve a puzzle that had lasted more than 3,000 years. The location of Queen Hatshepsut, Egypt's most powerful female pharaoh, whose mummy had never been found. Hatshepsut's tomb had been discovered earlier, but it was empty. Many of her monuments were destroyed after her death, and her name had been carved out of history. The only clear trace of her existence was a small wooden box found in another tomb. It carried her royal name and contained a single tooth, carefully wrapped and stored. No one imagined that this tiny object would hold the key to one of Egypt's greatest discoveries. In 2007, Dr. Hawass and his team began examining the unidentified mummy using computed tomography scans. When they looked closely at the mummy's mouth, they noticed something unusual. One upper ear was missing. This simple observation led them to compare the missing tooth with the one found in Hatshepsut's box. The size, shape, and position matched perfectly. The discovery confirmed that the unknown mummy, KV68, was indeed Queen Hatshepsut. This finding changed the understanding of Egypt's royal history. For centuries, Hatshepsut had been erased from monuments and records by her successors, especially Thutmose III, who wanted to restore traditional male rule. Many scholars had doubted whether her body would ever be found, but this scientific breakthrough restored her identity after being lost for over 3,000 years. After the identification, the mummy underwent detailed analysis. Scans showed that Hatshepsut had been in her late 40s or early 50s at the time of her death. She was overweight with poor dental health and several physical problems. Further study revealed that she suffered from bone cancer, which likely led to her death. Her skin showed evidence of creams that may have contained harmful ingredients, possibly contributing to her illness. DNA testing was then conducted to confirm her royal lineage. The sample showed strong genetic connections to Thutmose I, believed to be her father, and to Amos, her mother. This evidence confirmed her position within Egypt's royal family and verified that she was indeed the daughter of a pharaoh. It also revealed that members of the royal line often married close relatives, a tradition that increased the risk of genetic diseases. Yet, as scientists continued to study her DNA, they uncovered findings that went beyond the mystery of identity. The deeper analysis revealed patterns in her genes that raised new questions about Egypt's royal family and their health. What they found in her DNA would open another chapter, one that looked back to her extraordinary rise to power and how she became a ruler unlike any other. But who was this woman, and why was she very important to the history of Egypt? The woman who wore the crown. During the early years of the 18th dynasty, Egypt stood at the peak of its power and wealth, around 157 years. Before the birth of Christ, the kingdom stretched across vast lands filled with temples, monuments, and thriving trade routes. It was during this golden age that Hatshepsut was born into the royal family of Thutmose I and Queen Amos. From the beginning, her life was surrounded by privilege, but also by expectation. She was trained not just to live in luxury, but to understand religion, politics, and leadership. Hatshepsut married her half-brother Thutmose II, as was the custom among Egyptian royals. This marriage joined two lines of royal blood and secured her position as queen consort. Together they ruled Egypt, but Thutmose II's reign was short. After his death, their son Thutmose III was too young to take the throne. Hatshepsut was appointed regent, responsible for ruling Egypt until the young king was old enough to lead. At first, she ruled on his behalf. However, as time passed, her power grew stronger. She began to take on more royal duties and appeared publicly as a ruler in her own right. Eventually, she made a bold and unprecedented decision. She declared herself Pharaoh of Egypt. This move changed the country's history. To rule effectively, Hatshepsut needed to present herself in a way the people would understand. Egyptian tradition viewed the pharaoh as a male figure chosen by the gods. To gain acceptance, she adopted male royal symbols. She wore the pharaoh's crown, the royal kilt, and even the false beard that represented kingship. In statues and carvings, she was shown as a man, but inscriptions still used feminine forms of words, making it clear that she was a woman ruling as king. Her transformation was not an act of deceit, but a practical, political choice. She understood that power in Egypt was tied to image, and for her rule to be strong, she needed to fit the role of a traditional king. Her leadership showed a deep understanding of Egypt's religion and governance. She worked closely with priests and officials, gaining their loyalty and ensuring that her authority was respected throughout the land. Under her leadership, Egypt entered a long period of peace and prosperity. She focused on rebuilding temples, expanding trade, and improving the economy. Her reign was marked not by war, but by stability and wealth. Hatshepsut proved that strength and wisdom could lead just as effectively as military conquest. Despite her success, her position remained delicate. Some viewed her as a temporary ruler, standing in the way of Thutmose III's rightful power. Others admired her intelligence and vision. Yet, she maintained control for many years, showing unmatched political skill. Still, behind her achievements lay a deeper story, one about her divine origins and how religion was used to strengthen her claim to the throne. The divine bloodline at Shepsuit's sacred beginning in ancient Egypt. A ruler's power was never just about politics. It was about divinity. To be seen as a child of the gods was the ultimate proof of legitimacy, and Queen Hatshepsut's story was wrapped in this sacred belief. The walls of her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari still tell this remarkable story, carved in exquisite reliefs that depict her as more than human, as a being born from the will of the gods themselves. According to the inscriptions, the god Amun, one of the most powerful deities in the Egyptian pantheon, descended from the heavens disguised as Hutepsut's father, Pharaoh Thutmose I. He visited Queen Amos, Hatshepsut's mother, and declared that the child she would bear was chosen to rule Egypt. This divine birth story was not a mere myth for entertainment. It was a powerful political and spiritual message. It established Hatshepsut's right to the throne, not only through royal blood, but through divine will. For the ancient Egyptians, to challenge her authority would be to question the will of a god. Hatshepsut was born around 1515 BC during Egypt's 18th dynasty, one of the most powerful and prosperous periods in Egyptian history. From her earliest years, she was surrounded by the grandeur of royal life. Growing up in the palace, she witnessed the inner workings of power and learned the rituals that kept Egypt's gods and rulers in balance. Unlike many royal daughters, Hatshepsut was not content to remain in the background. She showed keen intelligence, a commanding presence, and a natural sense of authority. Even as a child, her education was thorough and deeply rooted in both religion and governance. She was taught the sacred duties of the priests of Amun, the administration of the royal household, and the complex systems that managed Egypt's wealth and temples. These lessons were not just for spiritual devotion. They were training for leadership. As the daughter of a king and the supposed child of a god, Shepsuit was prepared for greatness long before she ever claimed it. When she came of age, Hatshepsut married her half-brother, Thutmose II, a common practice in royal families designed to keep the bloodline pure and strengthen claims to the throne. The marriage also reinforced her political standing. As queen, she held the prestigious title of God's Wife of Amun, one of the highest religious honors in Egypt. This title gave her direct influence over temple wealth, priestly rituals, and connections to the divine, a combination that placed her at the center of both political and spiritual life. In her role as high priestess, Hatshepsut performed ceremonies that linked the earthly kingdom to the heavens. She became a living symbol of balance between humanity and divinity. Her participation in religious rites gave her unmatched authority among the people who saw her not just as a royal figure, but as a messenger between gods and men. Every ritual she performed strengthened her bond with the deity Amun, reinforcing the belief that she was indeed chosen by divine power to lead. Hepsut's understanding of the divine birth story went beyond faith. She used it strategically. The tale of Amun's visit to her mother became her shield against political opposition. When the time came for her to rule, she used this sacred origin as proof that her reign was predestined. Her image as the daughter of a god made her untouchable, even in a world where men had always held the throne. Her early years as queen also revealed her exceptional leadership qualities. She learned how to handle court politics, manage temple resources, and oversee the kingdom's affairs. During her husband's reign, when Thutmose II passed away, leaving behind a young heir, Hatshepsut took on the role of regent, ruling in his name. But her divine birth narrative, her experience in governance, and her connection to Amun soon gave her the confidence to take on the full title of pharaoh. By then, she had everything needed to rule: lineage, divine backing, and the respect of the priesthood. Through religious symbolism, careful planning, and sheer intellect, Hatshepsut transitioned from queen to pharaoh, breaking one of the most sacred traditions in Egyptian society. She ruled not as a woman among men, but as a divine figure above them all. As her divine birth legitimized her rule, Haps began to turn her divine blessing into tangible power. What followed was a golden era of trade, construction, and peace, the kind of reign Egypt had never seen before. Hatshepsut's reign of prosperity. When Hatshepsut ascended the throne, Egypt entered one of its most stable and prosperous periods in history. Her reign was marked not by war or conquest, but by peace, progress, and remarkable achievements that reshaped the nation. Every decision she made reflected wisdom, foresight, and the deep understanding that power was not only about domination, it was about creation, stability, and legacy. Unlike many rulers before her, Hepsut did not focus on expanding Egypt's empire through battle. Instead, she strengthened it from within. The economy flourished under her leadership. Trade routes reopened and monumental building projects rose across the land. Her rule became a golden chapter in the story of ancient Egypt, and her name stood proudly beside the greatest pharaohs in history. One of the most famous accomplishments of her reign was the grand trade expedition to the land of Punt. This journey, depicted in detailed carvings at her temple in Deir al-Bahri, remains one of the earliest recorded international trade missions in the world. Hatshepsut's ship sailed down the Red Sea, carrying gifts and Egyptian goods to this distant and mysterious land. The expedition returned with treasures that amazed her people: gold, ivory, ebony, exotic spices, and incense trees. Among these was the myrrh tree, which Hatshepsut ordered to be planted in her temple courtyards, making it one of the earliest recorded attempts at transplanting foreign flora. This successful mission brought Egypt great wealth and prestige. It strengthened the kingdom's economic ties with neighboring lands and established Egypt as a center of trade and culture. More importantly, it showed that Hatshepsut's policies of diplomacy and commerce could achieve what wars often could not: lasting prosperity. Her reign was also a time of architectural brilliance. Hutepsuit embarked on an ambitious program of building that left an enduring mark on Egypt's landscape. She restored old temples, commissioned new ones, and ordered the construction of magnificent monuments that symbolized her divine authority. The Temple of Deir el-Bahri, built into the cliffs of western Thebes, remains one of the greatest architectural wonders of ancient Egypt. Its terraces, ramps, and colonnades rise gracefully from the desert, telling the story of a ruler who combined beauty with power. The economy thrived as her policies promoted agricultural growth, trade expansion, and temple construction. Egypt's borders remained secure and its people enjoyed stability after years of political tension. The priests of Amun gained more influence as her close allies and the temples she built became centers of wealth and spiritual power. For nearly 2 decades, Hatshepsut ruled over a land where peace replaced warfare and prosperity replaced uncertainty. However, not everyone welcomed her success. Beneath the surface of her peaceful rule, quiet opposition grew. Some members of the royal court and priesthood resented her position. In their eyes, the throne of Horus was meant for a man. Although her divine birth story protected her, whispers of disapproval lingered in the shadows. Her stepson Thutmose III, who had been too young to rule when she took the throne, waited patiently as her influence continued to grow. Still, Hatshepsut's reign remained unshaken. Her careful leadership and divine image silenced most critics. She continued to rule with confidence, building temples, sending expeditions, and enriching Egypt in ways that few rulers before her had achieved. Even centuries later, her reign stood as a model of balance between strength and compassion, tradition and innovation, faith and reason. As her golden age drew to an end, the seeds of revenge and ambition began to grow. What followed after her death would shock Egypt, a deliberate attempt to wipe her name and memory from existence. Illness, death, and erasure. The final years of Queen Hatshepsut's life marked a slow and painful decline from the brilliance that once defined her reign. After more than 20 years on the throne, the woman who had ruled Egypt with confidence and wisdom began to suffer from serious health problems. The queen who had built temples, led expeditions, and stood as the symbol of divine strength now faced the limits of her humanity. Recent scientific examinations, including CT scans conducted on her mummy, have given researchers a clearer understanding of her final years. The scans revealed that Hatshepsut suffered from several chronic health conditions. She was obese and her body showed signs of diabetes, poor circulation, and severe bone degeneration. The most troubling discovery was evidence of bone cancer, which had likely spread through her body in the years leading up to her death. Experts believe the cancer may have been triggered by the use of a skin cream containing a carcinogenic substance known as benzopyrene. Ancient Egyptians often used ointments and balms to treat skin conditions or maintain their appearance. For a queen like Hatshepsut, such treatments would have been part of daily life. Unknowingly, she may have been applying a cream that slowly poisoned her system. It is a tragic reminder that even in the height of luxury, her world lacked the medical understanding we take for granted today. Despite her deteriorating health, Hatshepsut remained active in government affairs. She continued to oversee temple construction, trade missions, and religious ceremonies. For years, she managed to hide her physical decline behind the image of divine authority she had carefully built. But as her illness worsened, the burden became too heavy to conceal. By the time she reached her late 40s, her condition had declined significantly. Her teeth showed signs of wear and infection, and her spine and joints indicated advanced arthritis. Pain and exhaustion likely became her constant companions. Yet, she remained the face of stability for her kingdom until the very end. Around the year 1458 BCE, Hatshepsut passed away, leaving behind one of the most successful and peaceful reigns in Egypt's long history. Following her death, her stepson Thot III took the throne. By this time, he was an experienced military leader, having served as co-regent during her later years. For 2 decades, he had lived under the shadow of his stepmother's rule, waiting for the day he could fully inherit the kingship. Once in power, Thutmose III set out to expand Egypt's territories and restore the image of male authority in the royal line. Not long after her death, a strange and deliberate campaign began to erase Hatshepsut's name from history. Her statues were smashed, her images defaced, and her carts chiseled off temple walls. Monuments that once celebrated her achievements were altered to show her male relatives instead. This act of erasure puzzled historians for centuries. Many once believed it was an act of vengeance that Thutmose III had sought to destroy her memory out of resentment. However, modern Egyptologists now view this differently. The eraser likely had less to do with hatred and more to do with restoring political order. In ancient Egyptian tradition, the royal succession was ideally passed from father to son. Hatshepsut's rule as a female pharaoh had disrupted that pattern. Once she was gone, her successors may have felt it necessary to remove her from the official record to emphasize the traditional male lineage. It was a symbolic correction of history, not a personal vendetta. This act of erasure, however, had far-reaching consequences. For centuries, her existence was almost completely forgotten. Without inscriptions or monuments to preserve her memory, later generations of Egyptians did not even know a woman had once ruled as pharaoh. Her temple stood silent, her name lost in the sands of time. The story of Hatshepsut remained hidden until archaeologists in the modern era uncovered the clues that would bring her legacy back to life. When her tomb, identified as KV-60, was discovered in the Valley of the Kings, researchers found a mummy labeled KV-60A. For decades, no one could confirm whose remains it was. It was not until 2007 that DNA tests and CT scans confirmed that the mummy belonged to Hatshepsut. The discovery marked the end of one of Egyptology's greatest mysteries and the rebirth of her story. The results of these scientific investigations revealed not only her identity, but also the details of her physical struggles. The queen who had ruled with grace and brilliance was human after all, vulnerable to illness, pain, and the slow decay of time. Her rediscovery also reminded the world that her erasure had not been entirely successful. Yet, the story of Hatshepsut's mummy did not end with her identification. The analysis of her remains revealed clues that would lead to an even deeper and more unsettling mystery. Scientists soon discovered that within her DNA lay secrets that could rewrite the history of Egypt's royal bloodline. As researchers examined her genetic code, they found traces of something unexpected. Patterns that hinted at foreign origins, hidden illnesses, and ancient secrets buried within her royal blood. The DNA mystery of Hatshepsut. The rediscovery of Hatshepsut's mummy solved one of archaeology's greatest mysteries, but it also opened a new one. Once the queen's identity was confirmed, scientists turned their focus to her DNA, a fragile thread of life preserved for more than 3,000 years. What they found within her genetic makeup did not just reveal the story of a single ruler. It hinted at a far deeper truth about the royal bloodline of ancient Egypt. The analysis began shortly after her identification in 2007, led by a team of experts under the direction of Dr. Zahi Hawass. Using advanced genetic sequencing methods, they compared DNA samples from Hatshepsut's mummy with other mummies believed to belong to her family, including Thutmose I and Amos Nefertari. The results confirmed what historians had long suspected, that Hatshepsut was indeed the biological daughter of Pharaoh Thutmose I and Queen Amos. This verification strengthened her rightful claim to the throne and settled centuries of speculation about her parentage. Yet beneath that confirmation lay something unexpected. The sequencing revealed genetic patterns that were not typical of other members of Egypt's royal line. Certain mutations and genetic markers stood out, suggesting anomalies that scientists had rarely seen in other mummies from the same dynasty. These findings hinted at a long history of intermarriage within the royal family, a common practice meant to preserve the purity of divine blood, but one that also carried biological risks. In ancient Egypt, the pharaoh was considered a living god. To maintain that divine connection, royal families often married within their own bloodline, sometimes between siblings or close relatives. This ensured that power and divine status stayed within the same lineage. However, centuries of such unions led to a concentration of genetic traits that made hereditary diseases more likely. In Hutepsut's case, the DNA study revealed traces of inherited conditions linked to hormonal imbalance, metabolic disorders, and weakened bone structure. These conditions may have contributed to the health issues detected in her CT scans, including diabetes and cancer. Even more intriguing was the discovery of genetic markers that did not match the common Egyptian genetic profile of the 18th dynasty. Some of these markers showed a closer relation to populations from regions beyond the Nile Valley, particularly areas south of Nubia and parts of the ancient Levant. This finding challenged the long-held belief that Egypt's royal line was entirely of local origin. Instead, it suggested a more complex ancestry that stretched beyond the borders of Egypt. The presence of these foreign markers has fascinated researchers. It indicates that the Egyptian royal family may have had ancestral connections to neighboring civilizations, possibly through trade, alliances, or earlier migrations. These connections could explain the diversity of cultural influences seen in Egyptian art, religion, and architecture during Hatshepsut's reign. It also raises new questions about how Egypt's ruling class viewed itself, not as isolated rulers, but as part of a wider and older network of civilizations. The DNA also revealed traces of chemical compounds within her tissues that pointed to exposure to toxic substances. These compounds matched ingredients found in ancient cosmetic and medicinal preparations. Among them were residues consistent with benzoprine, a carcinogenic element later linked to her bone cancer. It appears that the very cream she may have used to maintain her royal appearance contained ingredients that slowly damaged her health. This connection between beauty and illness adds a tragic layer to her story. A ruler who embodied divine perfection, undone by the very tools of her status. Perhaps the most surprising result came from the mitochondrial DNA analysis. Scientists identified a rare genetic pattern that did not fit neatly into the known Egyptian lineages. This pattern appeared older and more diverse than expected, suggesting that Hatshepsut's maternal line might trace back to pre-dynastic populations, groups that lived in the Nile region long before the first pharaohs united Egypt. This discovery hints that the royal bloodline might have carried genetic traces from ancient peoples whose identities have been lost to time. While these findings are not fully understood, they have reshaped how scholars view Egypt's past. The idea that Hatshepsut's lineage could include both native and foreign elements changes the narrative of Egypt's history from one of isolation to one of interconnectedness. It also challenges the traditional concept of pure divine descent that ancient Egyptians promoted. Instead, it shows that Egypt's greatness may have come not from separation, but from the blending of diverse roots. The secrets hidden in Hatshepsut's blood had been uncovered. But one question remained. How would history remember the queen who defied the gods, ruled like a man, and left her mark in both stone and science? Today, her name stands beside the greatest rulers in history, her achievements no longer hidden by the politics of her time. Museums and universities now feature her prominently in exhibitions and research projects. Her statues, once smashed and defaced, have been carefully restored and displayed in Cairo, Luxor, and museums around the world. Each piece tells part of her story from her early days as a queen regent to her transformation into a full pharaoh. Visitors gaze upon her images with admiration, not as relics of a forgotten ruler, but as tributes to courage and innovation. The scientific study of her remains continues to provide new insight. DNA analysis, CT scans, and digital reconstructions have not only confirmed her lineage, but have also deepened understanding of health, diet, and life expectancy in ancient Egypt. Researchers use these findings to trace medical practices and the genetic patterns of ancient dynasties. Through her remains, scientists explore how ancient Egyptians understood diseases, how they treated them, and how royal inbreeding shaped health outcomes in later generations. Her discovery has also become a model for modern forensic techniques used in archaeological research. Her temple at Deir el-Bahari, once half buried in sand, now stands proudly against the cliffs of western Thebes. Visitors from around the world come to admire the terraces and statues, the carvings that tell stories of her divine birth, and the famous expedition to Punt. The temple is no longer a ruin. It has become a monument to memory itself, representing how history, even when hidden, can be recovered. Egyptologists continue to study her inscriptions and monuments, discovering new details about her rule. Each translation brings her closer to the modern world, showing her not as a myth, but as a human being, intelligent, ambitious, and deeply devoted to her people. Scholars highlight her administrative skill, her diplomatic success, and her dedication to expanding trade rather than war. She emerges not just as Egypt's first great female ruler, but as one of its most capable leaders, regardless of gender. Modern Egypt, too, honors her legacy. In museums and documentaries, her story is told to new generations as a lesson in endurance. Her name, once erased, is now engraved again, not in stone, but in the hearts of those who study her. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your